Thank you, and welcome once again to the Thursday evening look into the Holy Book Devotional. I am your host, Charles Logan. It's great to be back after the Thanksgiving vacation. And by the way, I try to remind everyone every once in a while that these are live videos and anything can happen, just like it did a minute ago when I went live and didn't realize it. So if you want to see how I prepare for these videos, you can watch a 17-second, the longest 17 seconds I've ever seen. So anyway, tonight we're going to try to answer the question, where have all the flowers gone? So I hope you enjoy our time together this evening. You know, I consider myself as growing up in the golden age of folk music. I recall with fondness songs with a story, with a moral, uh, like Puff the Magic Dragon, a story of growing up and giving up a child's perspective on the world. And a 110 soldier rides away, a rather poignant reminder of man's greed and his need for territorial domination. You know, I remember groups like Peter, Paul, and Mary, and Bob Dylan, the Kingston Trio, just to name a few. It was a time of nonconformity and mistrust of authority, anti-war demonstrations, and you know, we identified with the image of a flower in the barrel of a National Guardsman's rifle. The peace symbol was everywhere, and our car bumpers, T-shirts, necklaces, posted everywhere in college dormitories. Thoughts of that time actually came flooding back to me like a tidal wave of memories when the oldie station the other day played the folk song by Pete Seeger called Where Have All the Flowers Gone? You know, I thought to myself, here we are, approaching the season of celebrating the birth of our Savior amidst the talk of World War III. Now, there are ongoing conflicts in the Middle East and war in Eastern Europe and uh, untold things going on all over the world. But I mean Christmas, the celebration of the beginnings of our new covenant of grace, is the one holiday that is truly a global phenomenon in the Christian world. You know, everywhere one can hear the songs and hymns of peace on earth and goodwill to all men, voices raised in the praise and glory of Christ, and age-old rituals and houses of worship that just echo the miasma of brotherly love. You know, our collective thoughts go to the dream of peace, especially at this time of year. While the hope of peace on the other side of the world is a flickering light on a candle that's just about ready to go out at any moment. This dichotomy of idealism, this inconsistent, fleeting hope of mankind for a time of brotherly love that is strong enough to extinguish man's desire to expand their territories and their influence. In actuality, that flickering flame of hope is the hopelessness of man's legacy of conflict. And unfortunately, it's repetitive. Now, there is such an incomprehensibility when it comes to celebrating Christmas, and I would guess that for the last 2,000 years, the gospel proclaiming the birth of Christ has resonated throughout the camps of opposing armies gathered by nations and kingdoms that claim their foundations to be Christian. Prayers in the opposing camps are raised, mingled with the gratitude for God's presence and support for their side. As an example, most of us are familiar with the event that occurred during World War I called the Christmas Truce. During the horrors of the opening days of World War I, the Battle of Ypres, to be specific, was all so spontaneous. In the week of December 25th, French, German, and British soldiers just crossed their trenches and exchanged seasonal greetings. They mingled and they exchanged food and souvenirs. There was even joint burials and prisoner swaps, much to the disapproval, of course, of the commanding officers on both sides. No man's land ceased to exist, temporarily anyway, and a general feeling of let live and let live was the mood of the day. It was a phenomenon of Christmas goodwill that, even to this day, has never really been repeated. Of course, the next day they went back to killing each other. Now we've all asked the question, why can't man live in peace? Why can't nations and kingdoms be thankful that a loving God resides in every nation and kingdom on this planet? Why does this cycle of conflict repeat itself over and over again? Why does this strange mixture of love and hate headline the story of mankind? I mentioned the folk song, Where Have All the Flowers Gone? For the words to that piece will be the theme of at least part of our devotional this evening. The song is poetically prophetic in a way, because it illustrates the flaw in the human condition. We do not seem to profit by the mistakes that we make. Or is it that we just do not want to learn from our own human history? Are we doomed to repeat the very reason for our own selfishness while claiming that we are doing these things because we are God-fearing people, or that these actions will somehow honor God? And now don't get me wrong. We all acknowledge that there are righteous wars. The Bible tells us that there are non-redeemable people on this world. And we're also told that there are righteous causes that are worth fighting and dying for. And I believe that to be true with all of my heart. God has made it abundantly clear which side that he's on and will continue to be on. Innocent victims of wars will have their day and will be avenged somehow, but it will all be by his hand and in his time. But still there is an incongruity in the concept of war and peace existing simultaneously. That we have witnessed the consistency of conflict as a means of resolving territorial, ideological, ethnic, and religious disputes, while at the same time professed our belief in the hope of peace on earth and goodwill to all men. It seems that God's greatest creation is the only creature on earth that can pray for peace on earth one day and plan for war the next. So our devotional this evening touches on two elements of the human condition that seem to be consistent throughout man's history. Now, one is that man is endowed with the compulsion to recognize, identify, and worship a creator, and at times use that relationship as a reason to go to war with another nation, claiming that God is on their side. A relationship that is much like a loving father who must constantly allow his child to get into trouble, to learn from experience, and watch over him, and of course forgive him as a wayward child for his forgetfulness and his disobedience. The second is looking at we humans as a creature endowed with free will that allows us to recognize the difference between good and evil, yet in our flawed state, we're incapable of the love for our fellow man, which mirrors the unconditional love that God has for us. While God forgives us, conflict will always be a means of resolving issues with our fellow man. Now, I mentioned that the poem that Pete Seeger wrote in 1955 called Where Have All the Flowers Gone would be the theme for the second part of our devotional this evening. It delivers the message that life is circuitous in that certain elements repeat themselves, and that unfortunately includes conflict. The sad part is there doesn't seem to be any way to change it. Now, having said that, let's look into the words of the folk singing prophet of our time, Pete Seeger, and compare his words with those of Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, each stanza of his work begins with a question. The first stanza is, where have all the flowers gone? Long time passing. And the answer is, well, young girls have picked them, every one. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn? The beginning of the poem asks the question that has troubled mankind ever since the very first disagreement ended in physical conflict. Why can we not look at the peace and the bounty of nature that was created for all kinds of beauty to enhance man's journey here? Why can't we profit from our knowledge of history? After eons of experience, we know how these things are going to happen and what it will take to stop the cycle, but we just seem to refuse to do it. Now, the second stanza. The question is, where have all the young girls gone? Long time passing. Where have all the young girls gone? Long, long time ago. And the answer is, they've gone to soldiers, every one. When will they ever learn? Throughout our history, men in uniform, handsome and courageous and honorable, have been the image of the protector of our country and our religious freedoms. They've been the epitome of everything great about one's home, patriotism and boldness, ideological truth and glory. For what is war but the opportunity to return from the conflict with honor and glory? Certainly not the Matthew Brady images of the Civil War. But young girls are drawn to the heroic soldier image like a moth to a flame, seeing nothing but a passionate, lasting love, and only partly obscured by the classical romanticism of it all. The third stanza continues with this question. Where have all the soldiers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the soldiers gone? Long, long time ago. And the answer is gone to graveyards, every one. When will they ever learn? You know, there's a certain sad futility that Seeger expresses in these lines. It is a feeling of futility that is the theme of the book of Ecclesiastes. A feeling like standing on a vantage point and watching the history of mankind passing before you and knowing full well that mistakes of the past are going to happen over and over again. A feeling of knowing what will happen but being helpless to do anything about it. A feeling that all of man's efforts will end up not changing anything, that all of his labors are meaningless. Of course, Pete Seeger's reflection was on the injustices that he perceived in an age of rebellious cultural change. Like Solomon, who, unlike Pete Seeger, was reflecting on a life that was blessed with every good thing. Solomon, however, chose to be led away from a gracious and merciful God by pagan wives desecrating the temple and ignoring the law. While Pete Seeger's motivation was an overreaching and dominating authority, Solomon was convicted by his own failures and disobedience. Now the last line of this, and it is a social protest poem in a way, returns us to the reality of the futility of conflict, especially, and the helplessness of mankind to return to the perfection that God created for man in the first place. It continues with this question: where have all the graveyards gone? Long time passing. Where have all the graveyards gone? Long, long time ago. And here is the answer, with a mix of natural beauty represented by the flowers and the folly of man's ever-changing territorial disputes and the inevitable conflicts that come after. The hopes and plans that young people make and the disruption of those plans because of the endlessness of war created by world leaders who use young men with dreams and hopes and visions of glory as fodder for their ideological cannons. And the answer: gone to flowers. Every one. Now mind you, there are justifiable wars, and the unselfishness of fighting men who sacrifice their youth for love of their nation and their God. We are always indebted to those courageous young people, men and women both, and hold them in high esteem. In the perspective of urban prophets like Pete Seeger, hope is in the unobtainable idea of world peace. Idealistic folly because of the futility of the human condition. A repeat of one life lesson, unlearned, repeated over and over again. You know, I understand the social protest years. I lived through them. And the urban prophets that promoted the idea of a government that was not to be trusted. Young people still found a way to dodge military service, but many of them answered the call as patriotic members of society. And as is always true, many did not return. Now, I'm conflicted by the book of Ecclesiastes. I've always wondered how a man so specially gifted by God, with all that one could dream of, wisdom and respect and wealth and power, reflects such a dark legacy in his later years. Provided that Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, I wonder how he could justify his talk of futility and folly when referring to the efforts of mankind. Even more than that, how is this kind of talk encouraging to God's people? Well, let's take one of the more well-known verses from Ecclesiastes that speaks to the futility of man's efforts. It's found in Ecclesiastes 1, verse 2. And it reads, "Vanity of vanities, says the teacher. Vanity of vanities, it is all vanity." The writer of Ecclesiastes is saying that life is nothing. It's useless. It's meaningless. How about verses 9 to 11? That which has been is what will be. That has been done is what will be done. And there's nothing under the sun. Verse 10, is there anything of which it may be said, see, this is new? It has already been in ancient times before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come by those who will come after. I don't know, it sounds pretty dark and gloomy to me, but what if we substituted the Hebrew word hevel, that's Hevel, each time we read vanity or futility, especially if that word means smoke, haze, or vapor. It's the intent of the writer to impress upon the reader how fleeting life is. Of course, that's true. It's unstable, it's unpredictable, and much like the wind. I believe that the deep meaning here, aside from the metaphors, is that it is meaningless to plan our lives, to give purpose to our lives without allowing God to be part of it. This book is very deep and is a very profound look at the things that we do to give our lives meaning. You may be the most educated person on earth. You spend a life at studying, getting all the degrees that you can get. One might be a great urban philosopher and be known for his wisdom. One might take on the task of building the greatest piece of art. But what is it all for? In the long run, 100 years from now, no one's going to remember any of these accomplishments. But the big picture is that the oceans will still roll upon the sands, and the mountains will still be a majestic sight to behold, and those southwest sunrises will still be breathtaking in their beauty. There is the impossibility of sustaining anything that man holds to be of value. One can work all of their lives looking forward to that time that you can realize your rewards and live a life of leisure. Then you walk in front of a bus and that ends your earthly journey right there. And all that money goes to someone who doesn't appreciate it. Hevel, remember the Jewish word hevel. It is all hevel, just an illusion, smoke, or vapor. Nothing on this earth will last because we ourselves are only visitors here. So from what we get from this book, what is the answer to the question, what good is any of this wealth, career goals, status, and pleasure if it is meaningless? It is accepting the concept of Hevel itself, accepting that our lives are a series of events that are out of our control. It is the realization that we have riches galore in the wonder and beauty of nature, like the wildflowers in old graveyards. Friends, a good Thanksgiving meal, and there are the true and lasting gifts from God, the true meaning of life on this earth. Those moments when our hearts are filled with joy. So as we look back at the theme of our devotional this evening, the discouraging words that seem to suggest that life is on a permanent cycle of repeating itself, forever churning young men and women into global conflicts with no hope of ever finding a permanent solution. That man is doomed to repeat his mistakes with no hope of profiting by those mistakes. So where have all the flowers gone? Where have all those small earthly pleasures gone? And is there any meaningful wisdom that we take from all of this? Well, the answer might be that all these things are part of the human condition. As we travel this earthly journey, nothing is permanent. Nothing that we accomplish will be remembered 100 years from now. The one thing that is permanent is allowing God to control our lives and to be prepared for the unexpected roadblocks that we will surely encounter. We live a Christ-like life so that those decisions will reflect our faith when we're judged on that day of days. So where have all the flowers gone? Young girls have picked them, every one. When will they learn to look at life as a gift? Cherish those moments of complete joy, appreciate nature's abundant beauty, and anticipate the unexpected events that will occur. Because we possess free and combined with the fact that we are flawed human beings, we can possess free will, we will remain helpless to repeat our mistakes. Man's efforts to control his environment are but smoke and vapor until we realize that God must be in our lives and that he is the one in control of our lives and our destinies. Well, thank you once again for joining me this evening. It's always my privilege and honor to share these thoughts with you. So you might leave a comment, but until, Lord willing, we can get together next week, may God bless each and every one. And I will say I am Charles Logan, your host, wishing you a good evening.